century. It's lasted pretty well. It's also the 100th anniversary of the birth of Desmond Greaves, and as you know, probably the 100th anniversary of the 1913 lockout. So next year we hope will be a little bit special. It will be special intrinsically, but we hope we'll be able to do something special. I have to tell you again about the fire exit, which is down the back. Red door, toilets are out there as well. And if you have to run out the door because of a fire, you can assemble in the back lane, and Finbar will take it from there. I'd also like to at this point thank Finbar for all he's done at the weekend. And I also thank Eddie, who took over the filming. Great relief for me. Thanks, Eddie. And finally, to say that though those of you who read the back page of the programme probably expect a social at 7 o'clock, that it is not going to happen, but we'll meet in the Long Stone and talk over things there. So this evening's session will be chaired by Mr. Bennett here, and I hand over.
The topic for this afternoon's session is national independence. What does it mean today? A very pertinent topic considering the state of the nation at the moment. It's actually a continuation of some of the themes that we've already been talking about, and we have three very distinguished speakers who will be addressing this issue from different angles. So I will call on the first speaker. My first speaker is Nessina Kosida, who has been working in the global justice sector for over 10 years. This included a 5-year spell working with Procare in Kenya, which I believe was a formative experience for her, and she shifted her focus to the responsibilities of enriched countries to radically reshape their relationship with the global south. So without any more formalities, I'll call on you to begin your presentation. Okay?
It's been a pleasure to be invited by the Pearce Centre and the Ireland Institute to present. So thank you very much, and very inspiring to see such a good crowd on a Sunday afternoon. Thank you all for staying for the last session. My title, Ireland's International Relations, is so broad that I'm going to make my focus very, very narrow. It was a very ambitious title that I was given, so I'll stick to what I know about most, which is Ireland's international development agenda, or Ireland's relationship with the countries of Africa, Asia and Latin America, which in itself is a very broad area. So I will focus more specifically on Ireland's international development policy as it's unfolded in recent years, with my particular areas on the question of international debt. But I'll reference some general trends around Ireland's economic attitudes towards what we call countries of the global south in my organisation, or developing countries, third world countries. Some people use different terminology. Well, I suppose tracing some of the discourse that successive Irish governments have used in relation to our attitudes towards the global south, I'll reference some of that first, not because that encapsulates the attitude of the Irish state as a whole, but rather gives us a bit of a benchmark to kick off discussions. Ireland has, indeed since the 1970s, referenced our colonial experience as a reason for us to advocate for the rights of southern countries internationally. And even as recent as Bertie Ahern's time, if you're still allowed to mention his name in public, he said, because of our history, Ireland can rightly claim to empathise with those who are suffering all around the world. That's his introduction to Ireland's White Paper on Irish Aid, which was published in 2006, and is kind of the pillar document which is supposed to set out Ireland's attitudes towards countries of the global south. And Ireland has also used other progressive rhetoric, at least, in presenting itself as a progressive country in terms of its relationship with countries of the south, joining like-minded donor groups with Nordic countries like Norway that top the poll in terms of overseas development assistance, that can have a tendency to be more challenging in terms of more structural development policy change towards countries of the South. So there's that kind of progressive rhetoric that has been in our documentation and in the language of government officials since the 70s. And also can be seen in some of our actions, but in a very limited way, which I'll outline next. And that has been, I suppose, in tension with other kinds of discourse that successive Irish governments have used. It's very revealing to see the title of Ronan Murphy's new book, Inside Irish Aid. The subheading is The Impulse to Help. He was the Secretary General of Irish Aid in the Department of Foreign Affairs over two significant time periods since the 1990s. So that charity-centred discourse still remains very, very strong within the Irish government, rather than focusing on policies or economic arrangements or relationships between enriched and impoverished countries. And then, of course, there's the bottom line issue, which is Ireland's self-interest in relation to countries of the Global South, which has not been documented, but rather is clear in Ireland's actions over the years, where it has shown itself to be in league with some of the most conservative and dominant powers internationally. And I'll talk a bit about what we've seen in action in terms of Ireland contradicting some of this progressive rhetoric that it is often put out in the public forum. Well, first of all, Ireland's our governmental historical relationships with countries of the South was formalised in the 1970s. 1974, what we know now as Irish Aid was established, which was a government institution which was supposed to formally deal with our relationships with countries of the South. And there's interesting documentation about why this happened. Some put it down to interested individuals, professors and philanthropists who felt that something should happen in relation to this, who started advocating to government in the 1970s. But it wasn't until Garret Fitzgerald came to the fore as a Minister for Foreign Affairs that he convened a meeting of ambassadors in order to formalise a formal department that would have formal relations in relation to international development with developing countries. But much more fundamentally, it was because Ireland would not be empowered to join the EEC at the time, as it was called, unless it had a development cooperation policy in place. So hence, in 1974 it was established. It's been characterised very much by Ireland's membership of international institutions, focusing significantly on the United Nations, and then from the 1950s Ireland became a member of the World Bank and of the IMF, which it seems in recent documentation the Department of Finance was not in favour of, but was pushed into by the Department of Foreign Affairs. We would have had to join anyway to access international loans. You have to be a member of the IMF in any case, when we did in 2010. But where does that bring us to now? Well, we can see in terms of the discourse, Ireland has very principles-based discourse around what it is promoting itself as, which is quite different to other, for example, G8 countries. It really emphasises local ownership in the Global South of their own development strategies and economic paradigms, and that they work in partnership with countries of the Global South. In addition, it has been, a big hitter in terms of overseas development assistance. It was 6th in the world by 2010. It genuinely has untied aid, which I'll talk about next, which I think is coming under threat. It doesn't link its aid disbursements to industry interests in its official discourse. And it doesn't give bilateral loans, which is quite unusual for a European country. I think Ireland is probably the only European Union member that doesn't have an export credit agency toward lending to developing countries. And in addition, Ireland was the first government to support total debt cancellation for developing countries, the poorest countries in the world, which was significant for our relationship with Africa in particular back in 2002, to the point that the World Bank sent over its president to visit Ireland in order to ask the Irish government at the time to desist saying such things. but it's an interesting lesson for us now that Ireland was viewed at that time as a champion in that campaign, though it certainly didn't go as far as accepting the demands that we were calling for at that time in Debt and Development Coalition. But comparatively speaking, Ireland felt that debt cancellation for the poorest countries in the world was a necessary action in order to tackle poverty. That was the way it framed it. So these are some of the positives which I can share with you, which we does distinguish Ireland in certain ways, but unfortunately that's about it. There are huge contradictions with the discourse that Ireland promotes in terms of its relationship with the South, and very few policy actions that we can point to that show that Ireland actually does believe in this genuine partnership of equality with countries of the South. Broken promises on overseas development assistance, where in a time of austerity the aid budget has been treated as a hugely soft target with disproportionate cuts to the aid budget. Policy incoherence is the biggest problem which Ireland has in terms of its decision making in relation to Africa, Asia and Latin America. We see this especially working on international debt issues, where the Department of Finance holds the purse strings and the decision-making power in relation to our membership of international financial institutions, so tends to silence Irish Aid and the Department of Foreign Affairs on these matters. Significantly on trade issues, international trade rules, Ireland is seen as highly aggressive in defending the Irish farming sector, and even in terms of tackling climate change, which is having such a disastrous impact on people of the global South in terms of the impacts of the immediate and future impacts of climate change. Ireland has vacillated, in particular since the new government, in implementing and committing to climate legislation. And in terms of our own area on debt, despite the fact that Ireland was viewed as one of the most progressive European Union countries in relation to supporting debt cancellation for the South, it has now gone very silent on this issue since some of the major debt cancellation deals that are quite well known through the Drop the Debt campaign have been done. In our view, these have not gone nearly far enough. They've excluded too many countries of the South. The process has come with really damaging structural policy conditions, which has forced liberalisation and privatisation on southern countries. And Ireland, the Irish government, successive Irish governments have had little or nothing to say about this. Part of the problem is that we are members, our country as a nation, we are members of deeply undemocratic international institutions, most particularly the World Bank and IMF in our view. And in these institutions, Ireland is represented by the Canadian government. It works on a financial system and a very historically outmoded system of voting. So we're currently represented by one of the most conservative governments in the world on major questions of international indebtedness. So we can see a lot of the hard power coming to the fore now as we live through our own debt crisis, where one of the first things that the new current government has done is to publish what it calls its Africa strategy, which really shows a significant shift away from even the rhetoric of partnership which Ireland has employed in the past, to talking about a partnership of equals between Ireland and Africa, which is then translated into increasing trading, relationships and opportunities for the Irish private sector to invest in Africa. So this is of really significant concern to any global justice activists in Ireland, because our untied aid programme has been protected up to now as a kind of minimum principled gesture towards building more equal relationships with the South. We've seen the World Bank, International Finance Corporation co-host a major conference here in the last 6 months, jointly with the Department of Finance, in explaining to the Irish private sector how they can make use of procurement opportunities in developing countries,